Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're getting into something pretty complex, based on the sources you've shared with us.
Yep.
The National Domestic Extremism and Disorder Intelligence Unit. You'll hear it called NDEDIU.
Mm-hmm.
Our aim here is really to unpack what this unit is, trace its history a bit, and figure out what it actually, does.
Absolutely. And looking through the material, one of the first things you notice is how many names it's had.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it started as the National Coordinator for Domestic Extremism, NCDE. Then it became the National Domestic Extremism Unit, NDEU. And now NDEDIU, adding that disorder intelligence bit.
Right.
And those changes, well, they're probably not just for show. They likely signal shifts in what the unit was focusing on or how they saw the threats they were looking at.
Okay, so let's place this unit. It's clearly not your local Bobby on the beat.
Yeah.
Where does it fit in the sort of the bigger UK policing landscape?
No, definitely not local. The NDEDIU, it's a national police unit. And importantly, it works under the direction of the National Police Chiefs Council. That's the body that, coordinates policing strategy across the UK.
Okay.
But operationally, it's actually based within the Metropolitan Police Service's Specialist Operations Group. So national remit, but run day-to-day from the Met in London.
And its core purpose, what's the mission statement, so to speak? What kind of intel are they after?
Well, initially, the main goal was gathering intelligence on domestic extremism. That included terrorism linked to extremist ideas.
Right.
But like we said, the name changed. Adding disorder intelligence suggests its job expanded. Now it also covers intelligence on protests, public disorder, more generally. Seems like a wider focus on potential disruption.
It's interesting that the sources highlight its start back in 2004 under the old Association of Chief Police Officers, ACPO. And they draw a line back to the Special Demonstration Squad from the 60s. What's that about?
Yeah, that comparison to the SDS, the Special Demonstration Squad, is pretty significant. Because the SDS, formed way back in the 60s, had a similar job, really monitoring groups they thought were subversive. It got shut down in 2008, lots of controversy around it.
Oh.
And the fact that this newer unit, in its various forms, essentially picked up that kind of role right after the SDS closed.
Well, it does raise questions, doesn't it, about whether there's seen to be a continuous need for this type of intelligence unit, maybe an institutional thing for monitoring dissent and extremism.
Right. It does suggest an ongoing perceived need, at least. And the timeline shows more changes later on, too.
Yeah.
A rename in 2010, ACPO units becoming the National Domestic Extremism Unit. Then a shift under the Met Police in 2011. What was driving those moves, do you think?
Those shifts probably point towards wanting things more centralized, maybe more direct oversight by putting it within a specific force, the Met.
Makes sense.
The 2010 rebranding under ACPO might have been about standardizing things nationally, but then moving it into the Met's business group, well, that consolidated operational control. Could have been aiming for clearer accountability, too.
The source mentions a size estimate in 2013, over 9,000 members. That sounds enormous.
It does, yeah.
Even if there's not 9,000 dedicated officers, but maybe a wider network, it still points to a massive investment in this area, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What does that tell us about priorities back then?
That 9,000 figure, assuming it's accurate, yeah, it represents a huge allocation of resources. You're likely right. It's probably not 9,000 officers solely in the unit itself. It more likely means a broad network, analysts, surveillance teams, support staff, maybe officers and other forces contributing intel to this national picture. But either way, it definitely shows this was a major priority, monitoring extremism and disorder around that time.
And leadership changes, too. Detective Chief Superintendent Chris Greene was in charge, then left in 2014. How much impact does the leader have in such a sensitive unit?
Oh, leadership is crucial, absolutely vital in any intelligence unit, especially one handling this kind of sensitive stuff. The person leading sets the tone, the strategy, the whole culture, really. So Greene leaving and the position being vacant for a bit, that would likely mean a period of adjustment, maybe some shifts in focus for the NDEDIU.
Okay.
And him moving to the National Police Coordination Center, the NPCC, that also shows how linked up all these national police bodies are.
Let's talk about the structure when it was under ACPO. Sounds like there were some specific teams we knew about.
Yes, back under ACPO, it had several parts that became fairly well known, often because they were involved in monitoring protests, sometimes undercover stuff.
Like which ones?
You had the National Public Order Intelligence Unit, NPOIU, the National Domestic Extremism Team, and the National Extremism Tactical Coordination Unit, NETTCU. Those were the bits often, interacting with the public and sometimes, at the center of controversy.
And then, by May 2013, that structure got tweaked, split into two groups.
That's right. A split seemed like aiming for more specialization.
What were the two parts?
One was the Protest and Disorder Intelligence Unit. Its job was mainly strategic analysis, looking at protest trends, public disorder patterns, trying to understand future risks.
Okay, the big picture stuff.
Exactly. And the other was the Domestic Extremism Intelligence Unit. That one kept the focus purely on intelligence about domestic extremism itself, UK-based, but maybe with international links too.
The sources also flagged some specific operations chasing the Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty campaign and going after the letter bomber Miles Cooper. What do those examples show us?
They really highlight the range, don't they? Stop Huntington Animal Cruelty, or SHAC, that was a very long, often intense campaign. Shows the unit tracking long-term activism.
Right.
Then Miles Cooper, the letter bomber that points to involvement in serious crime investigations where there's an extremist motive behind it. So quite a broad spectrum.
That shift in mid-2011 seems really key. The coordinator role gets rebranded as the National Domestic Extremism Unit. It moves under the Met's business group. And you said some units merged. The Tactical Coordination and Public Order Intelligence ones?
Yeah, exactly. NETCU and NPOIU merging.
Why consolidate like that? It sounds like integration was the goal.
Almost certainly. Putting them together under the Met likely aimed for, smoother operations, better coordination between gathering the intel and the tactical side of things.
Makes sense.
And maybe clearer lines of command, better accountability under one roof. Combining tactical stuff with public order intelligence could just make the whole response to protests or extremism more efficient, unified.
Okay, now this brings us to something that sounds particularly sensitive, maybe controversial. The National Domestic Extremism Database.
Right.
What do we know about that?
Yeah.
And why was it kept under wraps?
Right. The database. It was set up to hold information on people labeled as domestic extremists or linked to those activities, including protests and public disorder. The fact it was apparently managed under the National Special Branch Intelligence System, NSBIS, which is already a system for sensitive intel.
Yeah.
And that we only really found out about it properly when The Guardian reported on it in 2009. That tells you how secret it was meant to be.
And what The Guardian revealed, that caused quite a stir, didn't it? It wasn't just about people suspected of, plotting violence.
Precisely. That was the worrying part for many. The reports suggested the database held info on people who just attended, lawful demonstrations, people with no obvious link to actual extremist activity.
Wow.
So naturally, that sparked serious concerns about how wide the surveillance net was cast, what got someone put on the database, and whether it was capturing people just, exercising their right to protest.
And this came out when The Guardian had also been reporting on police arresting peaceful protesters and police justifying digging into people's backgrounds.
All right.
Sounds like a real clash brewing.
That's a really important context, yeah. There was this tension, police saying, look, we need this info for public safety to spot threats early.
Right, the official line.
But activists and civil liberties groups were pushing back hard, saying, hang on, this kind of mass data gathering goes too far. They worried it could scare people away from legitimate protest, basically treating ordinary folk expressing views as potential suspects.
Let's try and pin down how the unit defined domestic extremism. It's described as different from terrorism. What's the key difference according to their definition?
Okay, so the definition they apparently used focuses on campaigns or political groups having a militant edge, and crucially, where crime is a factor in their activities.
A militant edge.
Yeah. And unlike terrorism, which usually aims for, mass fear, big national impact, lots of casualties, domestic extremism was framed more as trying to stop specific events or force policy changes.
How?
Through actions described as out of the ordinary, things that could cause casualties, but maybe more localized, not meant as huge national threats. Think things like stabbings, shootings, maybe chemical attacks as examples given. The goal often seemed to be grabbing government attention with something impactful, even if smaller scale.
That distinction's useful, but it feels like there could be fuzzy lines there, couldn't there? Where do you draw the line between a very passionate, maybe slightly unlawful protest and something officially tagged as domestic extremism? What are the practical problems in actually using that definition?
You've hit the nail on the head. That distinction often boils down to judging intent, judging the potential threat level. And that's inherently subjective, isn't it? Hard to pin down.
Yeah.
And that ambiguity is exactly why people worried about overreach, about mislabeling. How do police interpret militant edge? What kind of law-breaking tips someone into the domestic extremist category? Those are tough questions.
The case involving PC Mark Kennedy, the undercover officer, and the trial collapsing. That seems like it was a major turning point.
Yeah.
Caused a lot of criticism, led to changes. Remind us what went down there.
Yeah, the Mark Kennedy case was huge. He was an undercover officer from that National Public Order Intelligence Unit we mentioned. He spent years infiltrating activist groups. And his actions, including, very controversially, long-term sexual relationships with activists he was spying on, and claims he encouraged illegal acts, eventually blew up a trial. 6 activists who'd protested at Ratcliffe-on-Soar Power Station had their case collapse because of his involvement.
And the official reaction, it sounds like they admitted things had gone wrong.
Oh, definitely. Nick Herbert, a Home Office minister at the time, told a parliamentary committee quite plainly that something had gone very wrong.
Okay.
And the direct result, ACPO lost control of those 3 teams dealing with domestic extremism. The plan to move them under the Met Police, which was already in the works, was then publicly confirmed by the acting Met Commissioner, Tim Godwin.
So real consequences.
Yes. And more investigations, too. Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary, led by Bernard Hogenhow, looked into how ACPO actually authorized these undercover operations, like Kennedy's. Plus, the Independent Police Complaints Commission investigated the local force, Nottinghamshire Police, over claims they'd hidden surveillance tapes from Kennedy that might have cleared the Ratcliffe activists.
Wow. So the Kennedy affair really threw a harsh spotlight on the whole practice of undercover policing in these units, didn't it? Oversight, ethics.
Absolutely. It brought up fundamental questions about the ethics of deep undercover work, about agent provocateurs, about accountability, and ultimately about public trust in the police doing this kind of work.
Lastly, the source mentions one more related name, the National Police Chiefs Council National Domestic Extremism Team. How does that fit in with the NDEDIU? Is it the same thing or something else?
It's likely related, but probably distinct. The NPCC team sounds more like a strategic body, setting policy at the national level, working alongside the NDEDIU, which is doing the operational intelligence gathering within the Met. It sort of reflects that national framework set by the NPCC, the overarching strategy for tackling domestic extremism.
Okay, so let's quickly recap this deep dive on the NDEDIU. We've seen this national police unit, under various names, tasked with gathering intelligence, initially on domestic extremism, but then broadening to public disorder, too. It's got roots that echo earlier state monitoring, like the SDS. It's shifted organizationally several times, landing within the Met but under national strategic direction from the NPCC.
Right.
A really key and often debated part of its work was that National Domestic Extremism Database, which raised big questions about privacy and spying on lawful protest.
Totally.
The unit's own definition of domestic extremism sets it apart from terrorism, but that definition itself seems tricky, maybe ambiguous in practice. And major controversies, especially Mark Kennedy, forced scrutiny and changes.
That sums it up well. And understanding this unit, the NDEDIU, is really important because it sits right at that difficult crossroads, doesn't it, between needing security and public order and needing to protect basic civil liberties, like the right to protest.
Yeah.
How intelligence is gathered here really matters for how dissent is treated in a democracy.
Which leads us perfectly to a final thought for you, our listeners. Given that threats are always changing and the ways of monitoring them are always evolving too, what do you think are the ongoing challenges? How do we keep striking that difficult balance between the state needing to protect people and individuals' rights to privacy and free expression? It's a question that feels more relevant than ever as this kind of policing adapts to new tech and new situations. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.